For a number of years, I was fatigued halfway through the day, even when I was really healthy, or so it seemed, right? Like I would work out hard and I just assumed that maybe my fatigue was a result of me being tired from my workout in the morning. But the more that I understood the scientific literature, the more that I realized that wasn't normal. I shouldn't just crash after a hard workout. As a matter of fact, most of the evidence suggests I should have felt energized throughout the rest of the day. So about 10 years ago, I had to take a good hard look at things. And over the last 10 years, there's a number of things I stopped doing that I feel have contributed to me having sustained energy throughout the day. So the first one is I stopped allocating so many of my calories to the evening time. Now, I don't mean just eating too much before bed. That is a problem. But what I realized I was doing was I was always working so hard to be in a deficit throughout the course of the day that from a pure energy balance perspective, I wasn't eating much throughout the day. And there's a very fine line between fasting, not eating at all, when your body starts to kind of tap into different stores, and eating too little. Like eating like a bird throughout the course of the day is kind of a recipe for not a lot of energy, just like eating too much throughout the course of the day is a recipe for not a lot of energy. But there was a double whammy effect that would happen. What would happen is I would start stacking all of my calories into the evening. I'd get home from work and I'd realize that like 50% or more of my calories were coming in the afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, and into the night. This massively impacted my sleep, and it wasn't until I started wearing devices and understanding that my sleep was really cruddy, even if I was sleeping for 8 hours, because I would wake up a lot or I would just not get into the slow wave patterns that I needed to, and that was impacting my energy the next day. I would always feel super energized in the morning and then start to crash by like 11, and it was dogging it throughout the rest of the day. Once I spaced my calories out a little bit more evenly, or at least got the calories in a tad earlier, it did make a humongous difference. I put a link down below for 30% off all things from Thrive Market on your first order. Now, they're not just about snacks and pantry staples. They've got good, legit, high protein foods, which is how I live. Even my snacks are high protein. Thing is, if you go to a grocery store, the high protein snacks, they're kind of playing games with you. Like they'll call it high protein, but you look at the ingredients and you realize that there's like some weird kind of like pea protein or something. Not that there's anything wrong with pea protein, but the reality is it's not what it seems on the surface, and it might only be 4 grams of protein. The thing I like about Thrive is you see what you get and you get what you see. It's transparent. So you can look at the ingredients and they're not gonna have garbage there and you're gonna be able to see it. And then it gets delivered right to your doorstep. So you're not having to spend time. Even myself, I know what to look for at a grocery store, but it takes me probably 25% longer to go grocery shopping than the average person because I do cross-reference everything that's in the ingredients. I don't like to bring that stuff into my house. Thrive Market takes that guesswork out of the equation for me, and it makes it accessible to me, but it makes it accessible to people all over the country. So that's what's really cool. So that link gets you 30% off your entire first grocery order and gets you a free $60 gift. Not to mention it gets delivered right to your doorstep, which is pretty darn cool, and their shipping is speedy, speedy fast. So that link down below. Number 2 is one that I've talked about before. I stopped prioritizing calories over nutrients. I realized a number of years ago that our bodies are more complex than just a thermodynamic equation. I understand that we are an open thermodynamic system. I understand that there is an energy balance situation. As a matter of fact, the first thing that I mentioned in this video was energy balance. So I get that. But I also realize that our body is a complex system and nutrient density has to play a role. So when I stopped focusing on how many calories do I get, and I focused on what is the nutrient density of that, how deep green is that leafy vegetable, how high of quality is that protein, how high of quality is the kind of fat that I'm choosing. First of all, it gave me a new thing to focus on, which was kind of energizing in and of itself. But suddenly I realized it was less about me focusing on how much food I was eating and more focused on just, hey, the quality. And that gave me sustained nutrition throughout the day, but ultimately kind of umbrellaed into sustained energy over the long haul too. Number 3 is one that's gonna irritate people, but I have a solution. I stopped relying on caffeine. It's kind of funny, like no one ever says, hey, I need to go take a nap. You know, we always say like, hey, I need a cup of coffee, I need caffeine. And we rely on it so much that we just override listening to our body. I realized that it's actually okay to take a nap. And maybe instead of grabbing another cup of coffee, I can close my eyes for 5 minutes. And I know not everyone can do that. Okay, and I know not everyone has the ability at work to just take a nap, and I totally understand that. But I think releasing some of the reliance on caffeine by switching to maybe green tea, or maybe having green tea or coffee every other day, and stop just relying on it so much, that could be a hugely impactful thing to do. So when I was just, hey, okay, it's no big deal. I'll just caffeinate up. I'll just caffeinate up. I'll just caffeinate up. Of course something has to give. I mean, it's not rocket science. But like Dr. Andrew Huberman talks a lot about non-sleep deep rest, like just closing your eyes, or even Nidra yoga, like where you're just doing sort of a form of meditation where you're just body aware for 15 or 20 minutes that can have huge rejuvenation effects halfway through the day. And they don't negatively impact your sleep. This was a game changer for me. I was afraid of napping because I thought that it would hurt me later on. But as long as my short naps, even 5 minutes of non-sleep deep rest where I just close my eyes and let myself kind of rest, huge impact. Number 4 was one of the more tactical things that I did. I stopped drinking so much water at night. Now, this comes straight up down to sleep. Okay. When I was drinking a lot of fluids at night, which is just like the calories, it would kind of end up that way where I wouldn't drink enough throughout the day and then I'd drink a lot at night. I would wake up in the middle of the night multiple times to pee. I still wake up usually once, but I was waking up 2 or 3 times. And each time it would take, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes to fall back asleep because I'd get up to pee and I'd think about something. I'd think about something with work, something I got to do the next day, something I forgot to do the day before. It's just reality. And that was catching up with me. You think about it, you lose 15 minutes or 10 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a night over the course of a week, and you've lost well over an hour of sleep. That's huge. So what I started doing is hyperhydrating in the morning and then tapering off as the day goes on. And I load up on electrolytes early in the day so that I saturate a little bit more, so that I retain a little bit more water as the day goes on, and I can afford to not drink so much in the evening time. Number 5, I stopped, for the most part, having carbs pre-workout. Now, this is something that I stopped doing years and years and years ago. You probably know me if you watch my videos as someone that typically trains fasted anyway. So this might not come as a shock. But for those of you that don't know me, or those of you that are still having a lot of carbs pre-workout, I don't want you to think you have to 86 this. You don't have to ditch the carbs. But what I noticed is that for some reason, if I would eat carbohydrates prior to my workout, maybe it's just because I'm soaking up all those carbs so fast in my workout, but later in the day, I would crash hard. I notice a huge difference in my sustained energy throughout the day if I train fasted, or at the very least without carbohydrates. Now, if you look at a lot of different theories, you can see why. Like, our body doesn't necessarily need dietary carbohydrates, although it seems like we do, even for performance. Our body is perfectly capable of creating its own glucose via gluconeogenesis. So we don't need carbohydrates for exercise. Perhaps they're an ergogenic aid now and then. Perhaps they trigger a psychological effect that makes us push harder. That could very well be true and often demonstrated, but I definitely don't think that they're a requirement. Some people might feel better with it, and that's acceptable and understandable. But if you're crashing a couple hours later, then that's negatively impacting how much energy you're expending as the day goes on. Now, on the contrary, if you're someone that trains fasted and you have less energy as the day goes on, then that might not be the answer for you. But this is what worked for me. Number 6, I stopped taking rest days. What does that mean? That sounds insane. Aren't rest days what we need for recovery? Yes, but I stopped taking conventional rest days. You see, in the bodybuilding world, where I've got to get a lot of credit, like that's really where I built a lot of my muscle, was bodybuilding style. Like, the theme is train hard and then really rest hard. And that kind of works, but it works for building muscle. It doesn't necessarily work for having energy. And what I realized is that by taking these deliberate rest days where I did nothing, I was just doggone tired. And I would have this ups and downs of energy. And it was just miserable because I could never predict what was going on. What I started doing is taking active rest days. My rest days, I still go for a light jog, or I still go for a spin, or I at least go for a walk or a hike. I am always moving because I don't believe that a rest day should be a day where you lay down and do nothing. As a matter of fact, I feel like being immobile is counterproductive. So I try to move, do something, and have an active rest day. I hardly ever take a full day where I'm just laying down doing nothing, unless I'm sick and I'm forced to. Most of the time, my energy is sustained if I just keep rolling. Number 7 is one that I'm not scientifically well versed in. Okay, but it's one that I've adopted principles of and it works really well. I have focused heavily on nasal breathing and, more importantly, stopped mouth breathing. Now, this is very difficult to do because we have our psychological sort of defaults, right? Now, I was never a heavy mouth breather, but I was never a big proponent or never heavily focused on nasal breathing until I realized that you're getting between 18 and 30% more oxygen when you breathe through your nose than when you breathe through your mouth. Not to mention it sort of increases the activity of your parasympathetic nervous system, which makes you more calm and therefore requires a little less oxygen because you have less energy being expended, you're less stressed out. So yeah, I'm a weirdo and sometimes wear nasal strips or nasal dilator, but that's not even the thing. I focus more so just on consciously breathing through my nose whenever I possibly can. Number 8, I stopped having huge post-workout meals. This is something I stopped doing like 7 years ago. I used to think I worked out, now it's time to just dive into a bunch of food. I think most of us realize that's not the way to do it anymore. Like, we realize protein synthesis stays elevated for 24 hours or more after a workout. So you don't need to be dogging a bunch of protein down right after your workout. That's not necessary. And as a matter of fact, it's probably counterproductive because you're probably increasing an inflammatory effect or probably just gonna make yourself fatigued later throughout the day. So what I do now is, yeah, I'll still have a little bit of protein inside of 60 minutes after my workout, but I don't try to just eat a big bolus of food. Not to mention, as a side effect, I lost a lot more body fat that way too. Number 9 is a weird one, and it may or may not be important for you. But I started taking about 1,000 milligrams of quercetin every day. Quercetin is a flavonoid that's very, very potent as far as driving up your body's endogenous antioxidants. But I don't think that's why it worked for me. See, Dr. Kyle Gillette had taught me that it's actually a potent histamine blocker. And I've always had very strong sensitivities as long as I was a kid to certain foods. Like grains, I get sniffly. I get super congested when I have grains. I can't tell you why, except for the fact that I seem to have an effect with histamine, high histamine foods. Now, rice isn't necessarily high histamine, but it's just an example. Quercetin does seem to block the effects of these high histamine foods. Now, that goes hand in hand with one of the ones I just talked about. It helps me breathe better. I realized that in the middle of the night, I was kind of dealing with almost this congestion-induced sleep apnea from my allergies and histamine. Quercetin made a very big difference in my ability to breathe through my nose at night and feeling more rested. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.